Hello everyone, my name's Alison Schwabe and I'm here to introduce my Quilt National quilt and my art to you. My Quilt National quilt, unfortunately, is not the one I'm standing in front of. With the COVID pandemic, at the moment I'm not able to be in the dairy barn for the opening, and so you will see it without me being around anywhere if you're attending the opening. What is behind me, which I'll get back to later, is one of the quilts that is in the series that has followed on from my Quilt National quilt pandemic pattern that I made 8 or 9 months ago. It's led on to other work. I'm an art quilt maker with a lot of years of experience. I came to quilt making from creative embroidery, or what we call mixed media these days, fabric, paint with stitch, and sometimes found objects. And when we went to live in the United States for a couple of years, which turned out to be 6, in the late 1980s, I very quickly became immersed in traditional quilt making, geometric pieced quilt making. I loved all that. But before too long, I was making my own designs, and I found myself in good company with some very creative people in Colorado. And before long, I was entering art quilt exhibitions and shows and competitions and so on. And I've been making art quilts ever since that, so over 30 years. I did do some workshops with amazing people, and I went to the first few quilt surface design symposiums. After which we moved again several times and so on, and to this day I now shout myself a masterclass or a multi-day workshop every few years just to get that creative charge. Up until this time, most of my quilts have been made with improvisational cutting and piecing, machine piecing, and either machine or hand quilting. I've always been a fan of hand stitch. In the last year or so, the last 18 months or so, I've been focusing more on hand stitch as a surface design element in my work, and was at the time, about this time last year, I was starting to think I'd like to do something hand appliqued for Quilt National, thinking of, for later on in the year. I always like to have something a bit special ready to enter Quilt National, and so I was doing hand appliqued stitching of strips of fabric and working designs with them. And it was while I was becoming quite immersed in this that the pandemic broke out, and the images onto our television screens came of rows and rows of freshly dug graves in hastily cleared ground, of coffins stacked up, bodies stacked up, sometimes 24/7 burials happening in different parts of the world where the virus was raging. And so the impact of that really horrified me, and I realised that in various parts of the world the landscape was being disturbed with this hastily prepared pattern. So that's what inspired me. So these things came together. I was doing a lot of handwork, and the pandemic produced the impulse to put out strips of earthy coloured pieces of fabric onto a background and hand stitch them down in a very loose sort of way. That actually led on to more. In the series, I realised that there was the little icon of the virus particle that we all recognise, the virion I think it's called, the circle with the little spiky bits. That's an iconic image. Masks are another iconic image. And I'm sorry to say, coffins. Coffins are the subject of my most recent pandemic pattern quilt, number 5. Behind me is pandemic pattern number 4. And the little round circles, they're bright against black. They're mostly red, but sometimes sort of magenta or orange. And the thread I've used to stitch them down with is neon or fluorescent green. I'm very struck with the idea of how in nature bright colours in feathers and on wings and bodies, beaks and things, bright colours are often a warning to predators that, oh, actually find something else to eat, I'm not good. It's a warning of danger. And that's why I'm working all this series in neon threads. I also ordered some extra ones and didn't realise that they were 1500 metre cones instead of 300 metre cones. So I've got a lot of it on hand, in green especially, but also in sort of orangey red and yellowy green. So I've got a lot of thread to use up, about 6 miles of it actually. But getting back to, yes, this did become a series, and it is in a way compatible with the rest of my work, which has always been inspired by landscape. Up until now, in my early days of textile art, I was very inspired by the fine textures and the lines and shapes and colours of landscape. That was my focus. However, as time went on, I began to realise that the processes that operate on landscape, wind erosion, water erosion, the cracking and breaking that happens with extreme changes in temperature, all these processes and more, in time, given enough time, will break down the hardiest rock into particles which can then be washed away. So the end process of these natural forces working on the Earth's surface is to wear down surfaces, leave marks and patterns on surfaces, and to build up the hollows and reshape coastlines. All these things are part of the forces of nature acting on the Earth's surface, the landscapes, and in a way these massive grave sites, cemeteries, enlarged cemeteries, are another onslaught onto landscape. They've changed the patterns on landscape in some parts of the world. To make this piece that you see in Quilt National, and I'm sure, as I say, the image will be somewhere in this video, I sewed down strips of earthy coloured fabric. They're about anything from 2 to 3 inches long and about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch wide, and hand stitched over them in fairly fine machine sewing thread. I can tell you I used a complete 750 metres before I ran out and had to choose a very close colour to finish it off. But I'm talking about maybe 1,000 metres of thread I got to do this. And I also needed to use I had a little spring-loaded embroidery hoop, a machine embroidery hoop actually. I wish years and years ago I'd bought the slightly bigger size, because I certainly had to change this a lot more often. But you will need to do hand applique. If you enjoy hand applique, you already know that you do need something to hold your fabric firm and straight so that you can use both your hands to do the work. So it was a pleasure to do, because during this pandemic, social life has disappeared, and we're all, we older people are all constrained to stay in and around our homes. And so I've had plenty of stitching time, and it's really also helped me to be a little bit calmer in this time. So landscape, I can say, has always been at the heart of whatever inspires me, and pandemic pattern fits that. There will be more. As I say, this is number 4. Number 5 has coffins on it, and I'm sure that's not the last I'll do with coffins. I'll do something with masks, I'm sure, and I'll just keep going, probably at least until the pandemic dies out. Finally, I'd like to say congratulations to my fellow exhibitors, and a big thank you to Holly and all her staff at the Dairy Barn, because I'm quite sure that this year's exhibition, Quilt National 21, is as good as any other that's ever gone on at the Dairy Barn, and I've been to all the other ones that I've been in, and a few more, and it's always a great show. So I'm sorry not to be with you this time, but I send my greetings to everyone, and cheers.